Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Deku was trained by Saitama, an alternate universe where Izuku isn't trained by the one with one for all, but an old bald man who only needed one punch for all the enemies he had ever encountered. Know this, the strongest hero isn't necessarily the strongest man. The farther you get from the people you want to save, the harder it is to save their spirits. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description box down below. If you guys enjoyed this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. Once he left the hospital, the sun had already set. With the memory of the bedridden Endeavor and that police interrogation behind him, Deku had started his trip to that udon place Saitama-sensei promised to treat him to. But it was then he got sidetracked. A few intersections from the hospital, Endeavor was staying at the banner that read, "LOV blood drive for the victims of Wookiees," was awfully hard to miss even in the absence of daylight. The League of Villains. In the distance he saw some familiar and unfamiliar faces, including one that was like his own in a maid outfit, sitting beside a very familiar-looking doctor under a tent. Deku could also see someone with a resemblance to Ida, yet knowing what happened to Tensei, he was doubtful of that person being the genuine Ingenium. There was also someone with patchwork skin, someone reptilian, a blonde girl with hair buns and a man in a gimp suit, but Deku accepted it all as natural, because that's the quirky world he lives in. It seemed like they were running a blood drive earlier, but now we're packing up. As he approached the stand, the blonde girl casually walks towards him to poke him with a knife, and he casually lets it happen. Toga's blade shatters on contact. "So you really don't bleed?" The blonde girl breaks into a grin as her heart starts beating faster and faster. Twice nods in agreement. "The allure of what you don't see. Like the boundary between skirt and thigh. Lace, stripes, strings, or commando? The answer is irrelevant compared to the mystery," was what the man in the gimp suit was saying while leaning over to the side in an awkward manner with his fingers forming a frame. Jean. With that utterance, Jean straightens himself out and pretends to cough, and Toga's attention is diverted away. Coming to terms with the fact that nothing in this world can truly hurt him, Deku was no longer as skittish as he once was. When it came to his own well-being, his senses were absolutely dull. His gaze was fixed upon the oddly otherworldly spectacle that shouldn't have been so otherworldly considering he knows Mineta. But it was in that instant there was a sound. Snip. Two antennas don't suit you. At most you should have one. One of the green protrusions of his mask, inspired by All Might's characteristic blonde V, was snipped off with a smile as arms are wrapped around his neck, whispering into his right ear. "A Zaku can never be a Gundam no matter how much it emulates it." Ingenium was taken aback by what just had happened. The blonde girl coming at the boy with a toy knife as a practical joke was one thing, but what happened next was something else. The girl that fixed his legs was someone with absolutely no presence that could be missed if one blinked. Yet as Ingenium looked towards the supposed siblings, he could feel something off from his personal experience as an older brother. Something unsettling. Though the faces have an unsettling resemblance, their appearances were on opposite spectrums. The smiling maid with the messy ponytail calculated her appearance with the obvious intent to pander to the lowest common denominator while following public decency laws to the letter, and the tense-looking boy simply didn't give a duck. Those bald patches caused Ingenium's own scalp to scream. That head was simply painful to look at, like a neglected lawn. Upon seeing the tension between the two, Ingenium had no choice but to ask, "Is everything all right?" "We're fine." Ingenium had accepted those words even if the tone was seemed off. Family was family. Even he didn't always get along with his little brother, but even so he loved that robot. Ingenium, whose instincts had been honed by his work as a hero, was more unsettled by the malicious gazes that were still trained on him. Gazes he could feel all throughout the blood drive event. Buzz buzz. It was in that instant Ingenium receives an urgent phone call. A fire. The sun had set and the blood drive was packing up. His supervision was no longer required. Ingenium leaves the vicinity, while calling any nearby interns to aid them. To save people as quickly as possible was Ingenium's ideal after all. As opposed to his little brother, Tensei was always one who had faith in people over rules, and like the vigilantes he occasionally overlooks, he left Love, his benefactors, to their own devices. Dabi and Spinner repressed their feelings towards the fake that Stain had targeted. Still, Having a cooperative hero who wouldn't pry too deeply about LOV's plans was a considerable asset considering the debt Ingenium owes. Now that he was gone, they didn't need to put on an act. Everyone is restricted by a set of rules, regardless of what power they possess. To maintain their life as it is, people must not stray from the path. Deku was no exception. Without a hero license or supervising hero and only conjecture, there wasn't much he could do despite his power. Aren't you guys a little quick with the blood drive? An extensive information network, I presume? Deku still remembers his first encounter with Love at USJ and their Numu. The fact that his doppelganger was carried away by a winged Numu at Hostu gave away her affiliation. The black mist that allowed the attack on the unforeseen simulation joint, USJ, was also present when Todoroki appeared at the end of the Wookiees incident. As such, it wasn't wrong to think that Love played a huge role in the tragedy and that the blood drive they are so conveniently holding for the victims of that tragedy was part of a bigger scheme. It was unfortunate that Todoroki was withholding information. I could never understand those pluses. Being born with such awesome quirks, yet frowning more than smiling. But she smiled in the end, didn't she? That fake accent is distracting. I know you can speak normally. How mean sobs, you never say anything about Uraraka's. Uraraka was obviously self-conscious about her natural accent, always trying to sound more like an urbanite, and for that reason, Deku saw no reason to pry. The fact that his doppelganger has such knowledge of his classmates confirmed his suspicions on Love having access to some hidden information network or surveillance system. There was always something suspicious about them dropping by in such quantity just as class was about to start at the unforeseen simulation joint field trip. Deku had always suspected that the teachers were trying to cover up something. The other possible explanation was that his doppelganger watched the sports festival religiously like he did. The only footage of Uraraka released to the public was limited to the broadcast on the recent UA Sports Festival. It was in that moment that Deku himself felt a little guilty about making so many notes on his friends and classmates. It was irrefutably creepy if one views it objectively. Kachan's death, his friend's injuries, and that girl's own death at Hosu, they were all undone. Either all those events were an illusion, or his doppelganger possessed an ability to tamper with causality. Considering Ida's older brother was up and about supervising this particular blood drive out of the blue a little while ago, it was probably the latter. Ingenium was simply repaying a favor in his mind, unknowing that he had taken something more akin to a bribe. Throwing out red herrings and keeping its true nature under wraps wasn't anything too uncommon in the hero industry, and the greatest example would be All Might, who always dodges the question with a joke during interviews. From the odd acts that resembled a prop, the one he was facing was a nerd who was big on out-of-place references. For all the analyses fanboys like him perform on quirks, government census data on quirks is iffy. He was diagnosed as quirkless when he was young, but UA still let him take the entrance exam, even though the occupation of hero is really just licensed quirk user, who worked in the civil service if you really break it down. But that wasn't important right now. A sibling with a quirk different from mom, dad, and mine. Numu who possess more than one. Someone with the ability to redistribute quirks. That isn't outside the realm of possibility. Deku's mumbling wasn't very silent. The tension in the air gets tenser, and to the side, Deku sees a familiar doctor. The doctor was the same one who diagnosed his quirklessness coincidentally, the grandfather of Tsubasa. Tsubasa being the winged kid that used to hang out with him and Kachan when they were small. Deku shifts his head to the side to see a winged Numu watching over them from the rooftop of a nearby building. Tsubasa? Was what Deku had mumbled as his eyes widened, which was not lost to the doctor, whose thick glasses obscured the windows to his soul. The doctor does not respond, but his doppelganger does with familiar enthusiasm. Isn't he so much cooler than before? He was so short and fat. Now he's so tall and… What are people to you? People? People? Counting fingers, Kachan is people. Nedzu is people. Principal Nedzu wasn't human. He was an animal with a quirk that gave him super intelligence, and that is why society viewed him as a person. The mirrored face pulls towards him and whispers something malicious into his ear. How did you become people? How can I become people? What's the difference between you and I? What's the difference? I can't understand. The doppelganger drops the artificial tone for an accusing one. You lie. You must understand, because for you and I, it all started with All Might. All Might was someone of worth. When he saw that smile when he was small, he was convinced he wanted to be like him. At that time, it was simply childlike admiration, yet it became something else when he grew older. When he discovered he was quirkless, that desire grew even stronger, not weaker, more desperate. because he realized he truly was nothing. He was nothing special, he didn't matter to the world in the slightest. He was simply nothing compared to everyone else he knew, and that's why he had clung to his dream to become something. He had to become a hero no matter what. For if the lives of others have worth, the hero who saves everyone must have undeniable worth. Even if it was just sophistry to prove he had worth, he continued to strive to be the ideal hero like All Might with single-minded focus. All Might wanted a world where everyone could live their lives smiling. To do that, he became a pillar. Deku wanted to become a hero. To do that, he strived to preserve the smiles of everyone. Superficially the same, but the priorities were reversed. His altruism may not have been genuine. That motivation junk has nothing to do with anything. Saitama-sensei's words resurface and Deku gains momentum in his thoughts. Izuku and a Gundam are still both mobile suits. Deku was not All Might. Even so, he did not give up his pursuit. Denying his own worthlessness with everything he had become a hero. That's what made him different from his doppelganger that embraced that worthlessness and had fallen to the level of a monster. A monster that did not believe in oneself. You gave up. You accepted that you were nothing who wouldn't amount to anything. Even if I understand, I don't agree with you. I am not you and you are not me either. I'll become a hero that saves everyone. It is now that Deku understands those words of All Might all those years ago in that old broadcast in an old childhood memory. Only you can choose to become a hero, not anyone else. It was not a lie. The circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. His path wasn't wrong. Splat. Deku threw his doppelganger over his shoulder, slamming her into the ground, breaking every bone. The floor is fine except for the splatter of blood. Though Deku was not a murderer and was completely averse to the idea of killing, that didn't mean he wouldn't harm others if they deserved it. It is what one does with life that determines what they are. But in the face of that, his doppelganger kept laughing. Hee hee ha ha ha. Gave up? So you really weren't lying. You don't get it at all. Save everyone? Aren't you going to hurt everyone here? Mother Fister? Deku steals his mind, ignoring the contradiction. He had hurt Todoroki's mother, and now he was droning on about saving everyone. It was nothing more than hubris. Even so, Deku did not stop. You're just spouting nonsense right now. The casual atmosphere had evaporated in a single moment. All the members of LOV became hostile. The flying Numu descends from the nearby building. A hero only saves the people they side with, the worthy. The unworthy, the villains that don't fit the mold, who were born wrong or harbored incorrect beliefs that obstruct the happiness of others, have to be sacrificed for the sake of everyone else. His doppelganger forces out words despite the broken ribs as she is smiling. I just want a world where everyone can live smiling, even if they weren't born right. If you're trying to make life difficult, even if you're a bit cute, especially if you're a bit cute, then you should be expecting trouble. Toga starts with grin as Twice continues. If you mess with the place where we belong, then make it double. Twice looks around and realizes they were missing the phantom thief boy from Class B, who is currently being re-educated by Miss Magna, while Toga eyes for any alternatives to knives. Her favorite had shattered on contact with Deku's skin, and she dismisses the idea of using that heated axe that cauterized wounds. Even if Sako had the same face, Toga really wanted to see Deku's bloodied form, and the blood of others staining him did not count. The man with patchwork skin loses his patience and interjects. Enough with the farce. Hero? Should a hero really be smiling right now? Deku was smiling while covered in blood that was not his own. Right now, especially with his patchwork scalp and blood-stained clothes, he didn't quite embody the ideal hero right now. With him alone with no one to save, he couldn't really act up to his words. Even so, he continued to smile to convince himself of his path. The man with patchwork skin takes a t-shirt they were giving away for free off of the table. Cheap commemorative t-shirts that merchants hand unceremoniously dumped after the recent incident at Wookiees, repurposed with red paint for the blood drive by LOV. T-shirts with Endeavor's face crossed out sloppily in red just like blood. It wasn't hard to figure out what was being implied. It's hard to call you that when you should have saved him first. Without Ingenium around, Spinner lets his feelings out. That's what Stain would have said. Hospitals were where the wounded were treated, but that didn't mean they were safe. The bad press Endeavor received would inevitably attract some fanatics, but Deku continued to respond with a cocky grin. I have nothing to fear, because Saitama-sensei will be there. Move it, old man! The bald old man obstructs the doorway to Endeavor's room, not moving an inch even as he's punched, stabbed, shot at, cut or burnt. But it's not like those things actually hurt him, judging by his unchanging expression. People shouldn't be jumping to conclusions so quickly. Give them back. was what a tall buzz cut boy had said. The tall one with the buzz cut accelerates with a large gale behind his back, trying to force through, but Saitama was an immovable object. Nudging his head through a gap, his eyes enveloped in tears are trained on endeavor. Return them, Mom, Mora, everyone else. I respected you. I admired you. But, despite those words, Endeavor continues to eye him coldly, even in his injured state. Shoto wasn't sure how to react. Saitama gives a gentle push. The boy falls onto the floor with a heavy thump. Old man, out of the way! Why are you harboring that worthless monster? There are many monsters in this world, but he isn't one of them. As Saitama gives a disapproving stare to the vigilante group that had gathered to wail on a single hospital patient. Vigilante may be a little inaccurate considering the school uniforms they wore belonged to Shiketsu High, another hero school like UA. You think you're a hero? What you're doing right now can't be called very heroic. The ones who oppose monsters are called heroes, alone if necessary. Aren't you the one confusing the roles? The buzz cut boy contemplates those words for a while. But before he can decide on his next action, he puffs up into a meatball as another student presumably from the same school rushes into the hallway. The buzz cut boy howls out. Seiji, did you forget what dignity was? Acting with class befitting with one's institution, says a boy with slanted eyes presumably named Seiji with the power to manipulate flesh. I apologize on behalf of Shinketsu High, is what the newcomer tells Saitama. His behavior isn't representative of our entire student body. As Seiji gets on his knees and puts his head on the floor, performing a flawless Dajiza, Inesa, who was having trouble standing and breathing, forced out his words. Did you follow me, just to stop me? Inesa, Endeavor may not have dignity, but we still have to uphold the dignity of our shu. At the end of that sentence, Seiji is restrained by his classmates, taking advantage of his kneeling form. This isn't the time for. Before they could do anything else, they could feel it. Everyone could feel it. For a moment, it was as if they all had died. All eyes turned their gaze to the old bald man in yellow by the door, whose eyes shifted slightly. As long as I'm here, I'm not letting this escalate beyond a schoolyard scuffle. Everyone was paralyzed by his presence, and Endeavor was especially surprised. It was something he felt from Stain. It was also something he felt from All Might, yet this was of a completely higher level altogether. Endeavor was certain that his heart had stopped, and it did for the students who came to see him regardless of intent. It was only because he was facing that man's back that his heart was still beating. Shoto was also taken aback. This was the man that personally trained Midoriya, but he never really paid any heed to what the plain-looking teacher could really do. Besides his scuffles with Bakugo during lunch hour, Shoto didn't really know the extent of the old man's abilities besides his great speed, but from that suffocating presence, the old man being the master of Midoriya was no joke. The old bald man's stern face was absolutely terrifying. Shoto did not have to actually see it to know that fact from how the people outside had inexplicably passed out. The old man was unbearably terrifying when he wanted to be. The stern face that could kill with but a stare breaks out into an awkward, terrified panic. Sorry! Saitama scrambles over what he should do next and resigns himself to what he must do. Serious CPR. In an instant, those who had their hearts stopped were revived. Endeavor can't help but wonder. That speed? It was fortunate that Saitama was so quick that no one could really see what he had done. They didn't see the old man move. All they could see was that he had produced a handkerchief from somewhere, and he was wiping his mouth vigorously with it. From Endeavor's experience, even if his eyes couldn't follow, he could tell what had happened from pure intuition. It was obvious from that speed that the unbearable pressure capable of stopping hearts was no quirk, but pure presence that dwarfs even All Mights by an immeasurable margin. Were the rumors true? Endeavor had always believed those old internet rumors to be a joke, an old folktale that the Yakuza and other outdated criminal organizations spread around. But witnessing this living deus ex machina, he wasn't so sure anymore. He recalls that the boy who had potential to become the next All Might, the boy who had saved him recently, held this man in high regard if those words at the end of the sports festival were true. Against All Might, the boy and especially this old man, Endeavor was absolutely nothing compared to them. He had accepted it long ago, but now the fact rears its head once again. Some people were simply better, and no amount of work or effort would change that. His son's chance was no better. Becoming the #1 hero was always a misguided delusion right from the start. It was all worthless, wasn't it? Right from the start, wasn't it? The despair he bottled up came gushing out. Inesa, who was just now recovering, could hear it. I used to think that if I just worked harder 3 or 4 times harder, it would pay off, but I am no match for All Might at all. It always end the same. I would always be staring at his back, and now I realize there are others just like him. Even my rank as number 2 is a sham, isn't it? Endeavor was crying. Having faced Midoriya before, Shoto could understand even though he didn't want to. Inesa was infuriated at the sight, rushing to the doorway once again. Even he started crying. Was the hero I once admired, was that hot spirit always a lie? That's right, I'm second rate. And I will always be second rate. Yeah, you are second rate. Saitama was not pulling any punches. Though stern in his tone, there was not a speck of arrogance to be found. How could you be the number 1 hero everyone believes in when you don't even believe in yourself? For a while, the whole room becomes quiet. Everyone was silent, until the silence was broken as the embers on Endeavor's face reignite. What do you know? Being born strong, born special. Just like All Might. Strong? Special? Being the greatest hero isn't just about being strong. All Might's strength isn't anything special. Endeavor did not want to hear such words. He kept mumbling, stumbling to deny those words. That loss of composure, the long string of words, Saitama zones out as he regrets ever opening his mouth. It was unfortunate for Saitama that not everyone was receptive of his advice. That was what it meant to be too strong and to live in a world different from everyone else. Just worked harder 3 or 4 times harder. Or the word Shoto was rewinding in his head. Though Saitama's words only served to trigger Endeavor, the exchange left an impression on Shoto. Shoto once believed he could become the number 1 hero even with half his power, but now he knew that was flawed. Despite his father's faults, his work ethic wasn't one of them. After facing the truly strong, Shoto knew his thinking was unbearably arrogant. The world was large. There were many monsters within it, strong monsters he would have to face, alone if necessary. That freckled face comes into view. The title of number 1 hero did not matter. It was only something insignificant his father had tripped over. Looking at Saitama-sensei, Shoto could only come to conclude that rankings were completely meaningless. Looking at his father, he had come to terms with his own insecurities. I still don't forgive him for what he has done. But if I don't give it my all as a hero, then I can't help but think I lost to him. Tamura watches the burning hero agency from a faraway building with a smile as the entire street is set ablaze through a pair of binoculars. The hero known for flames has his hero agency burning down. Wonder if his insurance company will cover this? He eyes the group responsible. Probably some vigilantes while breaking into laughter, sporting the same t-shirts his motley crew gave away at the blood drive being chased away by Ingenium. Tamura needed a good laugh. After his meeting with Overhaul went sour. Even though he has accepted that not everyone will listen to him, he can find some solace that some people will act without him saying anything. It's a good thing I found you, Chisaki. I told you before, don't deal with those who harm honest folk. An old man exits out of a vintage car that was looking worse from where, accompanied by men in cheap suits parked in front of the TV station Tamura had recently exited from. That little talk show was the easiest money he had ever made, and it won't be the last. The old man looks at Tamura with Kurojairi beside him and gives the pair an ugly look. Scram! There is a moment of silence as Overhaul builds up resolve to do what Pops expects of him by shooting a dismissive gaze at the pair he had originally called out himself. You heard Pops. Now I thought you were the boss of your very own operation. Overhaul's expression was hard to read due to the mask covering his mouth. Whatever. Kurojairi unlocks the suitcase, revealing very genuine-looking bills, and Tamura runs his fingers through them. SSSHHHH. The bills return to dust, their value becoming nothing. What are you? Piece them together at your leisure, and call me again when you're actually taking this seriously. Tamura throws the empty suitcase at Overhaul and misses by a wide margin. It was always easier in video games. TCH. My card's in there, somewhere. Persuasion is hard. Tamura exits the scene courtesy of Kurojairi's warp gate with dark mist trailing behind him. After hearing the news about what happened to Endeavor, Bakugo intuitively sought out Endeavor's hero agency as he left the diner, and his intuition proved to be correct. Self-righteous idiots were not limited to the ones he knew in that small classroom. Bakugo expected as much. Someone was dumb enough to burn down a hero agency. But the question was who? Blasting himself from rooftop, he spies a familiar figure, the bad touch man, and prepares for a drop kick. Eat this! Even so, there was no impact. Tamura had dodged at the last second as if he was expecting someone to attack him. Surprise attacks don't suit you? Hey, I remember you. You like winning, don't you? How about you? Punch. Tamura is decked in the head. Tamura's body lays splayed out on the ground. Not interested in anything you have to offer, is what Bakugo says to the bad touch man. Hee. Head's all fuzzy. Not letting me finish? Croc. Tamura is kicked in the side. It was possible that his ribs were broken considering Bakugo's choice in footwear. Didn't feel that one. But should you really be doing this? Your head wasn't alright before, but I guess I made it worse. Crack. Tamura is kicked in the side again. Kicking an innocent bystander while he's on the ground. Is that standard hero procedure? Well, actually, now that I think about it. What part of you is innocent? Watching things burn isn't against the law, but I'm pretty sure assault is. TCH. Bakugo recognized the man from the attack on USJ and on that talk show, but he could understand right away what the man was getting at. He was not directly affiliated with the arsonists, and Bakugo did not see anything that could serve as evidence as he looks around. Bakugo was always the explode them first, ask questions later sort of guy. Without skipping a beat, he rockets away to the scene of the fire as he contemplates what possible utility his explosions would even serve in such a scenario. Kurogiri returns in a puff of black mist right after being called away by Dabi, only to find Tamura looking worse for wear lying on the ground. Sorry, I'm late. What happened? Persuasion is hard, by the way. Did we clear the stage? What are you spacing out for? Sorry, Kachan. Bakugo and Deku were in the middle of a practical exam, yet only one of them had their mind on the task at hand. New Hampshire smash. The ground explodes. With All Might in the center and by reflex, Deku prepares to launch a counterattack, yet when that smoke cleared, All Might was clutching Bakugo by the neck. Even with his airways restricted, Bakugo peppers All Might. Oh wow. The tiny firecrackers had no effect whatsoever. With someone in trouble, Deku loses all reservation and he punches All Might without thinking too hard about the force behind it. Smash. All Might is launched into a nearby building as he lets go of Bakugo, but quickly gets up and admonishes his attacker. Still not serious? The two stand off before launching into a contest of blows. Ora Deku muda. Anything that gets close to the two combatants would surely be reduced to giblets. It was an area of undeniable death by punching. The sheer wind pressure the two were generating were enough to blow Bakugo away into a nearby wall. He was holding back, wasn't he? Bakugo could not stand up to the wind. He could not re-enter the fray. His explosions could not propel him beyond the wind of Knuckles. His win at the sports festival must have been a lie. The ugly thoughts continued to stew. It looked like Deku was on the defensive, but that was only because his lack of reach. All Might, who had a larger build and longer arms, looked to have the decisive advantage, but that was a lie. Serious smash. All Might was blown away, and as Deku stared dumbfounded at his bloodied fist, he was forced to remember of what he had done to the members of LAV that day. A boy stands alone with the dark sky hanging overhead. He was covered in the blood of his foes, who now all lay broken like dolls. The winged Numa was grounded with one of its wings torn off. The unmoving Dabi had received some things more serious than simply new scars. Toga and Twice had their legs broken. Spinner came out of the ordeal better than most with only a single broken kneecap. The only other person standing was that doctor from the boy's memories, the one who diagnosed his quirklessness. That doctor was trembling, but he still remembers the origins of the boy. You should really have given up back then. Deku does not look at the doctor. Instead, he looks at the carnage he had created. He had cold eyes that looked far away, dead set on what he had to do, eyes which the doctor once knew all too well. Toga is on the floor, with her legs broken, but even so she urges herself to look up at the boy. Of all the things that were true, there was something she accepted completely. Beautiful. The blood-stained boy does not look back at her, and that is what hurts her the most, not the injuries he had inflicted. She sensed melancholy that was of a different kind from those of all her victims. It was different from the melancholy of inevitable death as they bled, for the boy shed no blood of his own. Your ideals, the reason you fight. The reason for your pained expression. I want to know it all. I want to know all about you, but that is Toga's regret as her own blood is spilling out. The boy would remain a mystery to her. She would not be able to learn anything more about him. That was her greatest regret as she felt her own life slipping away. The fact that love had a great insurance policy did not change those feelings. Heroes like you, Stain was right. Spinner eyes the figure that smashed them all down in an instant. There was no hesitation in his use of excessive violence. That is what heroes had become. This was what they were fighting against. The immature iguana boy steals his resolve and tries to get back up before the boy shoots him with a stare. F.A. was all he could finish before he is hit by that stare. Deku remembers what he had wanted to be, Mighty Boy, All Might Jr., Captain All Might. I wanted a name like his, but I know I'm not All Might. Deku wanted to be the ideal hero, but to do what was necessary right now, he had to stray from it. It's a gamble. Dabi had already passed out some time ago, while everyone else was close to passing out. Even though Deku looked more like a villain in this situation than a hero, he remained resolute. Resolute amidst the uncertainty in his plan, even as one of the members was clawing himself up while clawing at his unmasked face. It's coming out! It's coming out! Scanning the floor, he grabs his doppelganger with dead fish eyes by the ponytail and states a fact. If it started the same for you as you say, then I can trust that you won't let anyone here get caught. That girl that approached me earlier with the knife, she's wanted by the police, isn't she? Then I can assume that those trusted to work with her don't have clean hands either. If you want those born wrong to smile, you won't abandon them here just to incriminate me. Just as Kachan isn't dead, Ingenium is running about. All this evidence against me will become nothing. You must have that ability. Deku says with a threatening tone with hints of desperation. Deku did not break down. He would not be beaten with mere words. The attempt was all for nothing. Even so, that outcome was known from the start. A loser will always be a loser. It was a fact of life. That should have been the case with Deku in his dream, but it had come true, unlike hers. It was an infuriating thing, but it was the same for Sensei. All for one to lived a life that was all for nothing. Everything I have done was all for nothing because of All Might. So I want to make everything All Might has done all for nothing. You won't restore me, for you understand the concept of bargaining power, so you aren't unintelligent. Even so, for helping Tenko, I'll give you something that can belong to you. All for nothing, it's a name like mine. There is silence for a while, before it is broken with a smile in contrast to Deku's expression. I couldn't win. How can you still be smiling? Deku's question did not remain unanswered for long as that one member who was clawing himself up became many. Though the original had his legs broken, his copy was walking about, and so was his copy's copy. Even if things don't go the way you want them to, Twice forces out. Even if you lose, says Twice number 2 with a smile. Even if you don't win, says Twice number 3 with a grin. Even if you look like an idiot, says Twice number 6 before Deku throws his doppelganger at him with a heavy thud. Even if you're walked on, says Twice number 25 as he receives Deku's fist. Even if you're kicked, says Twice number 34 as he receives Deku's foot. Even if you're sad, says Twice number 47 as he receives Deku's elbow. Even if you're bitter, says Twice number 51 as he takes a lariat to the neck. Even if you're tired of it all, says Twice number 72 as he's drop kicked. Even if it hurts, says Twice number 126 as his skull is caved in. Even if it's hard, says Twice number 245 as he's punched really hard. Even if you're weak, says Twice number 345 as he's snapped in two. Even if you aren't right, says Twice number 400 before being reduced to gooey chunks. Even if you're humble, says Twice number 535 before being reduced to misty giblets. Through all of that, we minus always laugh, says over 1,000 clones as they rushed at their single enemy while pinching their cheeks. His body was many and his heart was fractured, yet at this moment, his heart was one. Though Twice had reservations of making clones of himself due to a certain incident in the past, he had cast that reservation away. Risking his fragile psyche, he had created many clones, yet even with all those hands, he could not touch his enemy. Clinging on to the hope of victory, the attack of the clones remained relentless. Even if I'm a fake, I am not alone. The army of men, the wave of men, all identical with the same mask, continued to claw at their enemy. Being an original or a copy, in Twice's mind, none of those things mattered anymore. Real or fake, they were all the same. They all existed to protect the place where they all belonged, the League of Villains, no matter how futile. Forcing himself to smile, Twice misleads the uncertainty within himself. The League of Villains was nothing more than a collection of misfits. That was what Twice had learned. They were a gathering of broken fakes that could not fit into society. No matter how much Toga had imitated normies, she would never fit in with a fake identity. No matter how much Ms. Magna insisted, the normies would question her gender. Dabi insists to go through life with nothing but a fake name. As Twice looks onto the boy that mirrors their green-haired small fry, it becomes apparent that Sako was a fake too. Twice was obsessed with a sense of self, for his quirk made it hard to maintain one. At the end of it all, the Twice that had remained might not have been the original one, but that did not matter now. We were all fakes to begin with, was the idea Twice used to steal his resolve. The attack of the clones consisted of various punches and tackles, yet none found their mark. Even with infinite fists, Twice could not match his opponent's one. Twice could not overcome the gap in power with numbers alone. The entire world's talc cannot cut a diamond, such was the unfortunate truth. Twice could not help but curse. Conservation of ninjutsu, how I hate thee. Real or fake, to Deku, none of those things mattered anymore. Real or fake, they were all going to be decked the same. Even with infinite power, Deku could not eliminate them all. For every clone he dispatches, 2 more would take its place. Such was the unfortunate truth, and thus Deku was forced to think things through. Each clone can create a clone. As long as one remains, he won't stop. Deku gets into a stance with his legs firmly on the ground. Then I'll just have to deck them all at the same time. Serious sidesteps. Deku's dilemma was answered with brute force. To match Twice's ever-expanding army, Deku created his own with nothing but his speed. Rushing forward with his arms cocked back, the army of Deku unleashes a single attack. One punch for all. The opposing army was swept in an instant, becoming nothing more than viscous goo. Every single Twice took a punch to the gut in a single instant. The many had once again become one as the original keeled over. Twice never stood a chance as he lay on the floor unmasked. Yet even though he lost this battle, he had clearly gained something, for he had the widest of smiles. The loser was smiling, but the winner was not. Deku's breathing had grown heavy. Ha 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 ha. Bodies were strewn everywhere, not unlike in his encounter with Todoroki's mom. It was something Deku never wanted to see firsthand, let alone cause. They had broken bones with blood pooling around them, with a lone doctor checking up on them. But even so, they continued to struggle just the same. Unlike street-level thugs he had fought during his tutelage under Saitama those years ago, the League of Villains was a different sort of enemy. They did not yield or run away from mere violence. They won't stop. They won't stop on their own. As long as Deku stands, they'll keep getting back up even if it killed them. The feeling of his fist passing through flesh was a sickening feeling. He grips onto his left eye because he can't fathom the horrific scene. Every second Deku stood in the hell of his own making. He could feel his heart breaking. For that reason, Deku had no choice but to leave for the sake of his own sanity. There are many monsters in this world. Deku briskly leaves the scene, leaving Love to their own devices. As he makes a turn and the scene behind him disappears, a curse was being cast. All for nothing. His costume, which was the color of Christmas red and green, quickly lost its red stains as if it was never stained at all. Hidden in his gloves are 2 strands of hair, the only DNA samples he was able to pilfer from the League of Villains before the event of his rampage was made into nothing. When that blonde girl tried to stab him, when his doppelgänger was leaning on him, he used the opportunity to secure hair samples without them knowing. He hoped a flashy violent show of violence would divert attention away from his subtler actions. But he felt he had taken it too far. His rampage was simply a cover to hide the fact he was acting with rationality. With a goal, that was what he wanted to believe. I'm not wrong. They'll be walking again just like Ingenium. He tried to convince himself that his actions were made out of only pragmatism, and not some misplaced sense of anger that was stewing within him after seeing those frozen corpses that day. Those frozen corpses caused by a poor gentlewoman that had only lived to be used by others. He tried to convince himself that he didn't hurt anyone on the long term, but that was just sophistry to soften his guilt. No matter what he tried to convince himself of, Deku felt guilty for not living up to the ideal he sought. But he knew that's what the League of Villains wanted him to feel. Mrs. Todoroki was already mentally unstable from her less-than-ideal marriage, and it wouldn't be a stretch to believe that Love was employing the same tactics on him in order to drive him off the righteous path. Even so, he refused to yield, reminding himself of what a hero should be. A hero saves people. Being a hero is not about beating up villains. Deku's ideal was different from Kachan's, yet to overcome a troubling situation, he fell back onto the idea of what Kachan would do. What he had done was no different from how he had acted in the attack at USJ against the shock-absorbing Numu. His actions were no different from the other students who beat the other uninvited guests with impunity. The attack on USJ was real. It was a cover-up to maintain the reputation of UA, which is what he had convinced himself of. Some of the teachers must be investigating them. He clenches his fist. He'll hand over the hair samples to his teachers and hope a DNA test would uncover some light behind the perpetrators of the USJ attack and the massacre at Wookiees. The League of Villains was not right. The reverse was also true. I'm not wrong. Even so, he couldn't help feel that he was straying from the path and all his efforts were all for nothing. It was a vexing scenario. In order to preserve the public trust in UA, The attack on USJ was passed off as an elaborate exercise, and now the staff at UA was paying the price. If they were to suddenly announce that the leader of LOV was in fact a dangerous criminal, then they would be admitting that they had lied to the public. Once the public knows of that, there would be no public trust. To avoid falling into a pit, they had dug an even deeper hole. That was what Principal Nedzu was mulling over with the fingertips of his paws touching. "I'm sorry," was all Vlad King, the homeroom teacher of Class B, could say before the principal. Testimony from Midoriya and Todoroki regarding the incident with Todoroki's mother complicated things to say the least. Nedzu has always had suspicions of Saitama-sensei, but that might just been that bald head of his. In the small circle of sentient non-humans beings in this world like him, there were always rumors about the symbol of human supremacy. Nedzu assumed that this symbol was a fictitious one started by the quirkless neo-skinheads generations ago, but now he wasn't so sure. The Dark Age. The idea of an unstoppable bald man in yellow plowing through inhuman monsters in the past must have had some credibility, since it was a concept that was repeated many times by books authored by sentient animals like Armored Gorilla. Wearing yellow wasn't very strange. It was a popular color among users of super strength like the young Sato, whose strength is derived from the ingestion of sugar. Even so, Nedzu could not bring himself to trust Saitama. He hoped that keeping him close with a teaching position would allow him to unveil the old man's true nature, but all they had was only conjecture. LOV only gained its troublesome harmless reputation after the USJ attacks were covered up as an exercise, which was the result of Aizawa's quick thinking based off of Saitama's words, who was apparently the master of Midoriya. Despite what vague information that was on Saitama, he was liked among the elderly, like Recovery Girl, and according to All Might, even Gran Torino was a fan. There was nothing concrete about Saitama hiding something. Midoriya was different in this regard, as there were many obvious things that rose alarms. His strength was one of them. During Aizawa's apprehension test, UA's budget was just recovering from the cost of the entrance exam, thus there were attempts at erasing Midoriya's quirk to save some money, yet the erasing hero's quirk proved ineffective on Midoriya. After conducting some tests in the lab on the hair he always sheds, it was revealed that he lacked a plus alpha factor. Genetically, Midoriya should be quirkless, and that matched up with public medical records. An extra toe joint was what Nedzu murmured under his breath, examining a certain X-ray on his computer. Digging into the Midoriya family background simply raised more alarms. He had a father who breathed fire that apparently worked overseas, and a mother whose quirk was probably a weak variant of telekinesis. A far cry from mythical figures of the Dark Age like Tornado of Terror or even Blizzard of Hell. If that woman was related to those old heroes, then one could assume that the quirk was something that got weaker over time, until it completely disappeared from the bloodline. Quirk mutations were a rare thing, and so was quirklessness, yet the existence of someone who shared the same face as Midoriya exacerbated the problem. "So you saw someone with the same face as Midoriya running the stands while you were mock fighting a serial killer?" Vlad King could not face the principal, and while staring at the floor he could only utter a single thing. "Yes, that matches Todoroki's testimony." Todoroki had visited one of LOV's hideouts during the incident involving his mother, so there was a rough idea of what some of the members looked like, discounting the members who were masked. Midoriya had even brought hair samples from some of the members of the League of Villains sometime after the aftermath. The first was a blonde strand belonging to a known serial killer with the surname Himiko and given name Toga. The other was undoubtedly his sibling based on DNA testing, yet the Midoriya family only had a single birth certificate for a single child. This extra individual also lacked a proper plus alpha factor among other things, but clearly had something else. If young Midoriya is indeed a spy for LOV, then these samples might be red herring. What could he possibly be misleading us into thinking? That's just circular logic. True, the plus alpha factor, the quirk factor responsible for someone's quirk, was something innate from a person's conception as a zygote. It's a beneficial mutation originating from a common source. Though someone's quirk factor could be hypothetically passed around to others, the idea of a preform being randomly gaining a beneficial mutation from some accident was a preposterous idea found only in comic books and crazy senile people. The idea of someone gaining a crab-form quirk by eating too much crab was simply silly. Whether he was biased from his own background, Nedzu had a single thought. Human experimentation. Do you think that's why they took Monoma? As evidenced by what they could gather from the Numa they captured in the aftermath of the USJ incident, the League of Villains undoubtedly employed human experimentation. The Numa were puppets that held multiple quirks, bioengineered weapons. It wouldn't be unreasonable that a child like Monoma with the ability to copy quirks, Replicate the form of someone else's quirk factor would make for some very attractive research material, was all the downtrodden teacher could reply with. Monoma wasn't taken by force. He worked for love willingly, even if it was through deception, so it wasn't exactly a traditional kidnapping case. Right now, Monoma was a missing person to the public and Yue was taking some serious flack. The only evidence they had that love was behind it was only conjecture and the young Todoroki's testimony. But there would be public outcry if that alone sufficed as evidence. Right now, love was loved by the public as much as the Todoroki family was reviled, especially after those charity events. Endeavor and his mentally unstable wife were popular topics of gossip among the public. No one wanted to admit it, but popularity alone held a lot of sway in today's current heroes society. Yet the only thing on Vlad King's mind was his own failings as a teacher. That was what Vlad King was mulling over. Shouldn't we mobilize a search team? With that troublesome warp gate. Quirk, that cloud of black mist that serves as gatekeeper. I doubt we'll find much. Saitama could not be trusted to be an exam proctor for the young students, even if his scuffles with Bakugo at lunch hour were mostly harmless. With the ridiculous strength Saitama's disciple possessed that wasn't a quirk, All Might was counted upon to be the exam proctor for Midoriya and Bakugo. Midoriya could not be trusted in a practical exam with a hero any weaker than the strongest they had. Even with All Might's deteriorating health, he was still the strongest hero in the eyes of the public and the faculty of UA. The League of Villains was a vexing entity with various unknown resources. They needed to be cut at the root quickly. Nedzu takes out a pen and paper and begins to furiously write an invitation. After exams, we'll invite them. Then we'll find out who's playing who. You don't know the meaning of restraint, do you? The elderly recovery girl muses. All Might. Deku was ashamed at what he had done to his childhood idol. All Might lay deflated in a hospital bed. The live stream of their particular exam was cut off by Recovery Girl in order to hide All Might's condition from any troubling eyes. The symbol of peace was crumbling. All Might's health had been deteriorating for years now. It was for that reason All Might found his resolve to become a teacher. Yet that fact had to be hidden to stop society from crumbling. As of now, only 2 students knew of All Might's condition. The unconscious Bakugo was resting in the bed parallel to All Might's. Tears were welling up in Deku's eyes. I'm sorry, All Might. I'm sorry, sobs. You must think I'm really pathetic right now. Though Deku was distraught, his tears revealed a comforting fact for All Might. In order to comfort that crying boy, he thinks back to the preparations he had made before he accepted his teaching position, and quotes Leo Buscaglia. Only the weak are cruel. Gentleness can only be expected from the strong. So to me you're the farthest thing away from pathetic. Principal Nedzu had tasked him with the heavy burden to dig up information on Saitama and his young disciple. It was for that reason All Might challenged Saitama to a fight that day. It was for that reason he was the exam proctor for young Midoriya. Unbeknownst to the rest of the UA staff, All Might had revealed his secret to Saitama, putting faith in Gran Torino's view. Looking at the crying face of the young Midoriya, he could sense no ill intentions. Even if there wasn't any evidence, even if it was simply conjecture, All Might was convinced that these two were trustworthy, regardless of what Principal Nedzu thought. If the next generation consisted of people like young Midoriya, then All Might could let the era pass him by without any regrets. Gentle, huh? Deku could not think of himself as gentle. If he was gentle, he would have ended up like Mrs. Todoroki. The weak and thus the cruel could not tolerate a gentle woman. Staring at his hand, Deku clenches it tight. He was told by Saitama-sensei that being the strongest isn't all that it's cracked up to be. Every day since then, heroes and villains alike reinforced that idea. But even so, Deku refused to regret the path he has walked. He'll continue on to that path running even if the destination wasn't the one he had in mind as a simple child who only admired heroes. All the while, Bakugo was mumbling in his sleep. Deku, you liar! You were holding back! You wanted to beat me, didn't you? Didn't you? All these years. An annoying voice rings in his head. You wanted to beat him. Even if you weren't cool, or strong, or just. Even though you weren't blessed with talent and are misguided. You want to beat the victorious people when you can't win. You wanted to prove that you were. Slap. Deku had slapped himself comically hard. A slap that could shatter bones, if used on anyone else, with Saitama being the exception. It was something that shocked All Might, so when he was about to say something more, Deku cut him off. I'll get some air. To Kurogiri's dismay, his bar was in disarray. The heroes had come and raided it. They knew it was inevitable. which was why they set up another meeting location right after their encounter with the Son of Endeavor. Even though the new bar was exactly the same as the old one in appearance, he couldn't help but feel something as he looks at the wreckage. So uncivilized. Broken chairs, with splinters and broken cabinet glass were on the floor. It was a good thing he secured his wine collection beforehand along with his wine glasses, lest the heroes started drinking it. It had been some time since the raid and there were no heroes in sight, though it could be a ruse. There could very well be cameras all over the place. But that was of no concern, for the LOV had plenty of media exposure already from public events. Attention was made to avoid leaving behind any evidence, and even if heroes were somewhere out there waiting to jump them, they didn't have anything they could charge them with. In fact, if word got out about this raid, the public would surely take their side just as they did during the blood drive. Besides, with him on the scene, escape was a simple matter. Looking at what was lost, he spies something on the floor that wasn't there before. It's an invitation. Kurogyri muses as he carefully inspects the foreign object for any traps. Shigaraki takes the invitation from Kurogyri's hands with a pinch of his fingers and schemes through it with a smile on his face. It's a trap. It's such an obvious trap that it would be rude not to walk right into it. This isn't a time to be playing chicken. They acknowledge me enough to try to catch me, but not enough to be subtle about it. Summer camp? It's a vexing thing, really. Which video games should I bring? Which party members? You think they have Wi-Fi? Kurogyri continued to trust the will of all for one. But sometimes that trust falters just a little as he looks at the successor he had chosen. The days had gone by and summer was approaching. The announcement of the results of the practical exam just before summer are always very emotional times, of both relief and of despair. As Shido, aka Pinky, was pinker than usual. "Oh my god, you guys, was what she was saying before she was cut off. "Don't," was what Deku was starting with before he too was cut off by Kaminari in an accusing tone. "Don't act like you can understand us, you obviously passed like it's nothing, like with everything. You never had to go through remedial hell." There was no certainty if Deku had passed or not considering his excessive use of force. The encounter with Twice had messed up his sense of power. Scaling for the clones he made did not have the same durability as normal people. If Deku was the exam proctor, he would have failed himself without question. "The bell has rung, so to your seats," Aizawa says. Everyone scrambled to their desks, well except Ida, who was already seated properly. "Morning. About the exam, some of you failed, and so, everyone's going to the forest lodge. Figures, everything has to be a twist with you," the rest of the class mumbles. His apprehension test, the staged attack on USJ, the surprise Saitama-sensei substitute, and the exam, the students were catching on to Aizawa. They convinced themselves. "Not again, UA! Can't you see our trust has already wavered?" Ida was miffed. Ida was standing. "Wet blanket," was what Uraraka says without much thought. She was too busy turning her gaze from Bakugo and Deku. She was really curious what had happened during their exam, though for the wrong reasons. Looking at a shiny spot on Deku's head, the place with no hair, she somewhat misses Saitama-sensei. He was the one who taught her the art of bargain hunting for groceries after all. Aizawa wasn't sure what to think of what the students have thought of him. Saitama-sensei did have to be the substitute for a not-so-insignificant stretch of time as his injuries from that very real attack on USJ to heal. The fact that Principal Nedzu had made a gamble and let a complete unknown who did not even have a proper hero license teach could not be leaked out to the public. Even so, it was apparently necessarily to gauge Saitama's trustworthiness. Currently, Saitama was teaching the upper years after more concrete information of his strength came into light. If student and master were to rampage together, then nothing could stop them. Aizawa certainly did feel a bit uncomfortable with that fact. But it was for that reason, All Might was always shadowing Saitama-sensei. All Might's emancipated form made a great disguise with the addition of a janitor uniform. From what Aizawa could see, Bakugo was in a worse mood than usual and Midoriya wore a complicated expression. The footage of their exam was being kept on hold, the results of which would unsettle the public if it was leaked, let alone to the rest of the student body. Deku was in an even worse state of mind than Todoroki ever since their internship ended. Aizawa wonders what happened between Shoto and Saitama-sensei. A kid doesn't easily get over the fact his parents are hospitalized, let alone the public denouncement from what his parents had recently done. Maybe that man can actually teach. A student with a dubious background beating All Might in a contest of brute strength was something. Such a fact was troubling, and it was compounded by the lack of interaction the boy had with the other students. The kid's innocent. If he had any malicious intent, Yui would have been rubbled the day of the entrance of exam. It doesn't make sense to beat around the bush with strength like that. Whether or not the boy was part of a villainous conspiracy like what Nedza believes, he would surely walk the wrong path without comrades. The rest of the class continued to keep an observer's distance. The path he had carved himself with brutish determination was not quite straightforward as he hoped. Bakugo continued to shoot Deku with murderous gazes as he continued to mull over the fact his path isn't so clear-cut anymore. A little boy named Kuda waits in anticipation for summer. He was a boy who had always thought the world was mad, and that was why he admired Shigaraki, who did not beat around the bush about that fact. That same Shigaraki was invited to the forest lodge this summer, if what he overheard from his aunt was correct. His parents were heroes and they died in the line of duty, as if it was a matter of course. They abandoned him to the other world without a thought. The world was mad, but what was the source? The answer had to be quirks. With quirks, people could pursue stupid dreams. Quirks were a disease, and there must have been people who thought the same way. If only the world could be right again. There was certainly something wrong with this world, but not in the way he initially thought. A little girl named Eri waits in the corner, with no one around to help her. Overhaul had taken Shigaraki's words to heart, and has truly become the leader of his own operation, with Pops being physically incapable of interfering any longer. There was no longer anyone who spoke out against the idea of tearing up a little girl over and over to create the cure. The mad world needed to be cured of stupid dreams. If only everyone else could understand that. He looks at the little girl and wonders why she isn't any happier, for she was the cure to make the world right again. There was certainly something wrong with this world, but not in the way he initially thought. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination.